And we are back on the Zero Hour. I am Richard RJ Eskow. We are broadcasting from Washington, D.C. My next guest rocketed to fame a few decades ago. Some of us count that way. In front of the band Kinky Friedman and the Texas Jew Boys with songs like They Ain't Making Jews Like Jesus Anymore. He went from there in true Renaissance man style to being a best-selling author. He has also had a political career in probably a couple other fields I'm missing too. Kinky Friedman, thanks so much for joining us.
RJ, a pleasure. How are you?
I'm great, man, and good to have you. I don't know if you remember, but you were on my old show a couple times, and we had long, wide-ranging discussions. I think once you even called me afterwards to finish a thought.
It's all, maybe I was lonely, I'm not sure.
But,
yeah, it's all coming back. Yeah, we do speak in the decades, don't we?
Yeah, you know, how did that happen?
I don't know. It's just been a long time between dreams. I told people in the beginning it's been 40 years since I've done a studio album, but that's not true. It's been 32 years.
Yeah, you know, we start rounding up too. That's the other thing that happens. Well, you do have a new album, and I wanted to talk to you about it. Loneliest Man I Ever Met. Now, the Wall Street Journal described it as subdued, but I wouldn't use the word subdued. How would you describe it?
Well, in general, I think the Wall Street Journal described it as a surprise.
Surprising new album. Yep.
Yeah. Now we're getting just great reviews for this thing. It comes about as the process. Well, I would describe it as to answer your question, unlike any politician would do. I will answer the question. I would describe it as romantic, and romance of necessity usually becomes tragedy, and true love usually winds up in a hostage situation.
Right.
And I think if Romeo and Juliet had ridden off into the sunset together and lived happily ever after, we wouldn't know their names. We wouldn't know who they were.
Yeah. Well, you know, successful true love, I think, is when two people hold each other hostage for a long period of time, but it's rare that kind of balance comes into life.
No, and that's dumb luck when it happens. I really, I do think there's a linkage, a melancholy linkage between great classical music and great country music, and that is melancholy. I can recall being a struggling songwriter in Nashville 30 years ago, and that's when my friend Hoover and I, Will Hoover, and I wrote The Loneliest Man I Ever Met. And looking back on it, that seems like such a high calling, such a pure state to be a struggling songwriter. And once you make it, once you have, or as Willie says, if you fail at something long enough, you become a legend.
Right.
But once you do, you become distanced from your art. And that could be why there's not so many great songs being written these days.
We're talking with Kinky Friedman about his new album, The Loneliest Man I Ever Met. And, you know, Kinky, it seems to me, you know, you talk about melancholy. It seems to me there's people they forget sometimes that there's sadness has a lot of beauty to it, too. Melancholy is kind of a beautiful state, and maybe that's why it inspires so much great music and great art, too. What do you think?
Well, yeah. I wouldn't have done this record if it wasn't for Brian Molnar from New Jersey, who's a kid. Well, you know, I'm like Milton Berle. I can call somebody a kid who's a 47-year-old man. But Brian kept hectoring me about doing a record, and I can't believe how well it came out. The songs like Christmas Card from a Hooker in Minneapolis, which tells us more about ourselves than about the hooker in Minneapolis, actually, because we're just like her. I mean, the whole song is a fabrication, a beautiful one, except for the last line when she tells you the truth.
And it's a Tom Waits song, right?
It's an old Tom Waits song, and Tom and I used to hang around L.A. together quite a bit in the old days, and this is one of his best. Also, the Warren Zevon song, My Bleeps Bleeped Up,
Right, right. We're on the radio now.
You can't even plug the song on the radio or print or television because of the title, but you can download it, and it's one of Warren's best, and it is not just about a man who's dying of cancer. It is a pretty apt description of the state of our country and our world today.
Yeah, what's the line? That blank that used to work don't work anymore, or something like that. Yep, there you go.
It won't work no more. Yeah, and then, and the doctor he goes to, I believe, maybe this is too much Zen interpretation, but I think the doctor is Jesus Christ.
Well, it could be because whoever it is, he gave him news that he had to accept. We're talking with Kinky Friedman about his surprising new album, to quote the Wall Street Journal, The Loneliest Man I Ever Met. Now, this is mostly you and acoustic guitar, right? This is, subdued or not subdued, I guess it's definitely intimate.
Well, that's not a good word for it. It is, I would say, stripped down. It's stripped down to the soul. And it's very similar in styling to Red-Headed Stranger, which was a great record, but done so sparsely that the record company and the other producers and the other artists, they didn't like it. They thought it was a bad demo.
Right.
This one is really intimate, and we have no click tracks. We have no songs written by committees of 4 and 5 and 6 people, and it does not sound like a background music for frat party. So it is really flying in the face of all the trends, but it's picking up speed, and it's doing extremely well. It's doing so much better than I thought. I thought, we live in a Miley Cyrus world. I didn't think it could break through the white noise, but it appears to be.
Yeah, well, that's great. I'm glad to hear it because, always been a fan of yours, and I hear you're going out on the road, or you're probably out on the road.
No, we're leaving. I'm leaving Thursday night at 3 a.m. From the ranch here, and it's a little more. I think it's about 33 city tour, back-to-back shows. Another idea of Willie's that if you don't take any nights off, you'll start running on pure adrenaline, and he'll deliver a very raw and pure show. And it is true, they get better and better as they go. And it is a tour on the Hank Williams level. There's 7 8-hour drives doing a show that night.
Well, I hope it ends better.
Well, yeah, I hope it ends better, too. And, I'm 70 years old, though I read at the 72-year-old level.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and listen, some of our big markets we download, but some of our big broadcast markets include Washington, Chicago, and New Orleans. So you can hit any of those towns?
2 out of 3. Yeah, we'll be in Washington on Monday the 12th, October 12th at the Hamilton. Be at the Hamilton on October 12th, Monday night, and then we'll be in Chicago in November 4th, Wednesday at Space in Evanston.
Well, darn it, I think I just...
New Orleans? No, I wish we could.
Nah, I might be out of town that night, or if I'm not, I'm definitely going to come by and say hi. Now, you mentioned your ranch. You wanna let our listeners know about that?
Well, we have a rescue ranch for animals called Utopia Animal Rescue Ranch, or utopiarescue.com. And we take in stray and abused animals, and over the past 20 years, we've adopted thousands of them. And it's, we think we've opened the gates of heaven a little bit wider. And it's kind of like Will Rogers said, if there are no dogs in heaven, I want to go where they went.
Yeah, well, I can relate to that. One last question for you, Kinky Friedman. I really love the new album. Encourage people to go out to hear you. But all right, so somebody sent me this talk. A lady gave on TV about, I forget what she called it, but people who are not into one thing, they're into multiple things. I think she called it multi-potentials or something. And the idea being that some people, like, they're born and they want to be a ballerina or a nuclear physicist or a brain surgeon.
I wanted to be a black Baptist preacher when I grew up.
How'd that work out for you?
It didn't work out too well.
Okay. But are you just one of those guys, because I think I might be, who just likes to do different things and move from...
Yeah, well, it's the curse of being multi-talented. And you Maybe you were born under a wandering star, which is a song on the record, and Mickey Rayfield, Willie Nelson's harmonica player, who's a virtuoso, also plays on the album, and he's terrific. So any of that stuff, I'm very, very happy with this one. I think this is more of a mirror than it is a record.
All right.
Like Johnny Cash's old song "Pickin' Time," which most people don't know, but is not only about a farmer in overalls waiting for the cotton crop to come in. It's about all of us. We're all laying by till picking time.
Yeah, every great song is, isn't it? I mean,
yes.
And you know, before I let you go, I guess the other thing I want to ask you about is, you know, I think somebody told me you don't want to talk about politics anymore, but knowing you, you probably talk about anything. Is there? You ran for agriculture commissioner. I've just been dying to ask you this. You ran for agriculture commissioner after having run for governor and so on, and doing really well, by the way. And I heard that you backed up this guy who thought that we ought to bring back deep fried foods to the schools. And
no, I didn't back up that guy. He was running as a Republican. I was running as a Democrat, and the Democratic leadership here saw to it that I did not win the nomination. Had I won the nomination, we would have beat that guy.
No, I just meant him on that you agreed with him on the deep fried food thing.
Well, if I did, that's the only thing I agree with him on. But I don't agree with him on much.
So what do you think of politics now? Anything, or does it just make you feel
terrible.
melancholy?
It's Nelson Mandela. Do you know this about Mandela, that they smuggled in cassettes when he was in prison in Robben Island, and that he listened to the song "Ride 'Em Jew Boy"?
I did not know that.
Every night as kind of a sign-off late at night, and that comes from Tokyo Seshwale, who was his right-hand man in the cell next to him. And when I was in South Africa, I think in '96, he told me about this, and he said that for me not to get too swelled ahead about it, because I was not Mandela's favorite singer, that was Dolly Parton. But the fact is, he said he did listen to "Ride 'Em Jew Boy" every night. And when we made the record in '73 in Nashville with Chuck Glazer producing, the last thing on my mind, we were thinking of, will the DJs play this stuff or not? But the last thing on my mind was that Nelson Mandela would be playing this in his prison cell. And, you look at the continent of Africa, and you don't see any Nelson Mandelas popping up there. And that's true here, too. I mean, I don't think there's anybody in politics that inspires me today. And that's why I really think we should have term limits, limit all of them, every elected official, limit them to 2 terms, 1 in office and 1 in prison.
All right. Well, we're going to leave it there because we're running out of time. But Kinky Friedman, anything else you want our audience to know? New album is The Loneliest Man I Ever Met.
Oh yeah, Loneliest Man I Ever Met, and I would recommend some advice that Willie Nelson gave me. Willie and I did the opening song "Bloody Mary Morning," and I got so high I needed a stepladder to scratch my ass. But at any rate, Willie gave me this advice. He said, if you're going to have sex with an animal, always make it a horse, because that way, if things don't work out, at least you know you've got a ride home.
There you go. Okay, well, we'll leave it there. Kinky Friedman, singer-songwriter on tour, coming to a town near you. Thanks for coming on the show.
RJ, see you down the highway.
All right, man. And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.